Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. Now, you may think that Brexit negotiations concluded December 2020, culminating in the deal that Brexiteers are saying is fantastic and that everything that's wrong with it, it's quite a lot of things, is just teething problems. You would be incorrect, however. There are still a number of things to be negotiated over the next 5 years, in fact, which I'm going to discuss here. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, there's actually going to be a video probably tomorrow that extends from this, I'm going to say, from the outset, because what I'm going to be talking about in this one is a few interesting developments that occurred last week with what in general we need to look forwards to. But of course, events are taking an accelerated route, potentially down a different path. So I want to link in what I say here with something potentially for tomorrow with what Michael Gove has said this week. But a couple of interesting things from last week. So first of all, moment of pure facepalm, and then a very interesting development. So the facepalm moment, first of all, some people may have seen this. Sir Patrick Minford, who has been the Conservatives' chief economic advisor since the days of Thatcher. Now, I don't think he's officially now the chief economic advisor to the Conservatives, but he is still very much involved. And he suggested last week in an interview that World Trade Organization rules mean that trade across the UK-EU borders have to be seamless by international law. Now, let us be clear here. He is an economist, right? He's a professor of economics at a decent university, in fact. But let us be equally clear that this is completely wrong. It's demonstrably wrong. And I know some people say, but you're not an economist, Phil. No, I'm not. But, you know, I've got eyes. If he was correct, that would mean there's no friction at any border between any two nations that are members of the World Trade Organization. But in actual fact, this is a demonstrable fact that checks and other forms of trade friction do occur between such nations. There are checks on goods between countries that are not members of the EU and the EU. You know, look at Turkey, for example, and Turkey's not in as bad a position we are. They have a customs union with the EU. It's just not a very strong one. It's not as good as the one we had, but we don't have anything. And there's serious friction at the Turkish-EU border. So anyone thinking that the friction we're experiencing now is just teething problems, no, it's not. We've got more friction at our border than Turkey has, unless we do something. And this is where tomorrow may come into it. But, you know, the situation is right now. Well, actually, while we're on the subject of World Trade Organization rules, before I move on from that, technically we're breaking those rules by not having as much friction, by not carrying out the checks on EU goods, because we don't have, you know, we don't have anything in place to allow them to come into the country without checks. In reality, however, that measure is only supposed to be in place for 6 months. So in 6 months' time, we are supposed to apply checks according to the government's timetable. So the World Trade Organization won't actually do anything because the procedure is countries complain to the World Trade Organization. They spend some time looking at it and they go, look, mate, you really should follow the rules, to which that country then has a choice, follow them or not, and then action will be taken, not by the World Trade Organization. It's all very weird. But in reality, it takes a couple of years for that to happen. If the British government's only going to have this measure in place for 6 months, it's not worth anyone's time making a fuss. But we know what he says is wrong because we can observe this around the world. But he's also an actual economist, so I'm going to conclude that he's lying. Rather than being a moron, he's not ignorant, he's just lying. He's preying on the fact that people don't really know what the rules are for international trade, and he's playing into this narrative that any trade friction is down to the EU just being mean, as opposed to that actually being the World Trade Organization rules that Brexiteers were delighted with. You know, and the thing is, a lot of people don't understand because we haven't needed it. You know, any friction that there's been in trade with us has been on quite a small scale because most of our trade's with the EU. But curious that an economist, albeit one with a strong affiliation with Brexit and the Conservatives, would say something that makes him look utterly ridiculous in the eyes of all of his peers, the people who actually understand what's going on. But anyway, that was the facepalm moment. Then the interesting development. So David Frost. This is the guy who was acting as the UK's chief negotiator, Boris Johnson's right-hand man in the Brexit talks. The one thing that Boris Johnson actually took a genuine interest in last year. And he was to be rewarded, now that it was over, with a very senior role in government, National Security Advisor, plum role. However, last week it was announced that that role is going to be taken by someone who's actually got some experience for it. Now, there are 2 points of interest here. The first is So David Frost had no suitability for that role. I mean, Theresa May had pointed that out in Parliament. It was a classic case of Boris Johnson appointing someone for a senior role because of their blind loyalty to him and his project and not experience or proven ability. But now we will get someone who in theory is suitable. Yeah, he could end up just being a yes man who tells the Prime Minister what he wants to hear as opposed to what he needs to hear. But we will at least have someone who has the ability to understand what the role involves. But the second interesting point is this. This isn't caused because David Frost has fallen out of favour. David Frost is still very much in Boris Johnson's good books. You know, and this is where Brexit comes into it. You know, this is an indicator that Frost is going to have a much more important role in coordinating Brexit negotiations. And there are a lot of negotiations coming up, you know, and laid out in the deal. And this bit of news does suggest that the government are going to be taking them seriously. Because you might look at the deal and go, okay, yeah, they've got to set up these committees, but it's just talking shops, you know, to see how things go. And they're not actually going to do anything of note. Obviously, the government are taking these talks seriously because they want to keep David Frost in charge of them, focused on them. And they think there are things to be won and things to be lost. And again, I'm going to continue that thought tomorrow. Boris Johnson said, on the announcement, and I'm quoting here, "I am thrilled that he has agreed to be my representative for Brexit and international policy." Now, I don't know whether you remember last year when Boris Johnson banned the use of the word Brexit. He also abolished the Brexit department just so that he could pretend Brexit had been done. So Brexit was in the past. Now he's happy to use the term in the future tense. The clearest indication I can remember from him in 2021 saying that Brexit isn't actually done yet, because he's still using it in the future tense now. It's still going on. But if it's still going, and it is still going on, whether he acknowledges it or not, but there are things that have to be done. So, for example, in March, there are two important things coming up for discussion. One, the EU is supposed to be making a decision on financial services. This is going to be dependent upon how the UK government makes certain intentions clear. So far, we've been refusing to say how our financial services is going to operate, to which the EU have basically said, well, if we don't know how you're going to operate, how can we tell that you're equivalent to us in terms of standards? The second thing is was supposed to be agri-foods, discussing, you know, whether certain agri-foods could be allowed into the EU that currently aren't. Now, obviously, part of that has been kicked in the knackers because certain health certificates that the government thought would be forthcoming in April turns out are not going to be, but there are still negotiations on that. And yeah, by the way, if you think that we're having enough trouble right now exporting food, particularly from Britain to Northern Ireland, I mean, yeah, we are. We're having a lot of trouble. And that's kicking off this week. And again, this is why I need to extend this tomorrow. But the EU did do us a few favours. We have grace periods on certain things. You know, some of those grace periods ends on the 31st of March. Now, we also have an issue with health certificates, as I say. That's the one that's kicked shellfish, or part of the shellfish industry. Do have to correct. So some people sort of suggested, remember what's banned in the EU are the live bivalve molluscs. And some people thought, well, I may have done, suggesting that it's the whole shellfish industry. The whole shellfish industry is badly affected by Brexit. And indeed, there are some crustaceans, shall we say, langoustines, lobsters, things like that, that some traders are not able to get into the EU. But in theory, they can be traded. It's just that in certain circumstances, the paperwork is so much of a nightmare that it can't be done easily. But even the health certificates that could alleviate certain problems, DEFRA is still working on coordinating with the EU. Again, all of this needs discussing in March to see if we're going to get any respite. But actually things could get worse, because if certain grace periods end, and I note that Michael Gove is now wanting them extended, that's interesting. But if they do end when they're supposed to, actually that makes trade actually worse. So it's not that things are going to get easier, things are going to get worse. And there's no time to deal with any of this, you know, for the end of March. We also have grace periods for certain things like chilled meats. That's a big one. So at the moment, it's not technically legal to export chilled meats into the single market from outside the single market, but the EU have they've done us a bit of a solid there, but that's got to end. You know, that grace period ends in June, I believe. Nothing that health certificates will do about that at all. You're just not allowed to transport chilled meats into the single market from outside. So businesses are going to need to adapt to this, either by having it frozen or just not trading at all. Again, time involved in this. I don't see how it's possible. Or I suppose relocating facilities. But again, I mean, that may not be feasible either. It's probably not feasible, in fact. And we haven't finished there, because we've also got a grace period on exports of medicines. That ends at the end of 2021. So we have longer to try and sort that out. But there's a lot of systems to sort out, some quicker than others, and they're all likely to need some active participation from the government. At the end of June, we're also going to have to apply full checks on imports from the EU. At the moment, we've tried to ease things by giving smugglers a 6-month pass. This is supposed to end for July, by which time we're going to need those 50,000 extra bureaucrats, or the physical infrastructure, which hasn't been built yet, but that's okay, because the 50,000 bureaucrats haven't been hired yet either, let alone trained, and to have sorted out all the currently misfiring systems, to say nothing of making sure that businesses by that point actually understand how to complete the paperwork, which is incredibly complicated, and we're still not getting a very high rate of accuracy with it. Right now, like I've said before, actually maybe a bit bigger, this is maybe a week out of date now, it might have improved a bit, but it can't have improved that much. 10% of lorries carrying agri-foods into the EU have got the correct paperwork. 90% have not. That's an even lower percentage than the government's own reasonable worst case scenario from last year. The government is also supposed to be working on a system to allow Northern Irish businesses unfettered access to what the government laughingly called the UK internal market. Of course, it's more accurately known as the British internal market because, well, Northern Ireland is part of the EU single market, so we don't actually have a UK single market. Not sure what that's going to mean for GB Northern Ireland trade. We know that there are going to be more barriers for trading between Britain and Northern Ireland, but the government also say they're going to raise trade barriers in other ways in July as well, but won't even start on the plan to reduce the need for these Northern Irish businesses until after this happens. Like, there's no plan for it. And those are the major highlights for what needs to happen in 2021. There are a few other things like data sharing, but the deal also includes a number of other things needed to happen in 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, 2026 and 2028. 2025 is a big one because that's when there's a review of the entire agreement. It's when, you know, the idiot Brexit party stooge that I talked about, you know, last week or something, thinks that the government is going to reclaim all of our fishing quotas. So there's a lot of things still to be worked out in order to get Brexit done. And then in 2025, we'll begin a big old review to work out what massive changes may be to Brexit we want to make then. It's like the whole thing almost not quite resets because we can carry on of wherever we've got to by then. But you know, the whole thing could be almost cancelled at that point. Which ensures, I suppose, that the Conservatives basically get to use their 2019 slogan, get Brexit done, again in 2024. Hopefully people will reflect on this before casting their vote this time. But anyway, those are my thoughts. As I say, there absolutely needs to be a part 2 to this after what Michael Gove has been saying. But that will be hopefully tomorrow. I may need a couple of days, but hopefully that'll be tomorrow. But until then anyway, I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.